Judas, the betrayer of Jesus, a very despicable man, and yet how could this man help us understand how we can become better followers of Jesus? Hi, my name is Father Mike Manning. I'm a Catholic priest. I'm coming to you with the desire of sharing the love of Jesus Christ in our life and how Jesus can be able to turn our lives around from the despair to the struggle and oftentimes hopelessness that we encounter and find there's hope and there's life. One of the things that I think is the key to finding this life and this hope is the Bible. And what I'm doing right now in a little series of talks is I'm going to one of the four Gospels, the Gospel of John, and I'm looking at the people that the Gospel of John depicts, people who have encountered God, people who have encountered Jesus, and then as we look at them, we try to understand how, from that encounter, I can be a better follower of Jesus myself. And so we've talked with various people. We've talked with Joseph of Arimathea, and we've talked with the woman caught in adultery, the woman at the well. We've talked with the apostles like Peter and Andrew. But today, I'd like to bring up a topic of a person that perhaps, well, we're not really too comfortable with. And the person is named Judas. Judas Iscariot. Judas, the betrayer of Jesus. Let's pause for just a moment and maybe look through the Bible and find out just what do we know about this man, Judas. And then we're going to try to see how he can maybe have an application to my life, even though this seems unlikely, an application to my life as how I should now become a better follower of Jesus. One of the things that I reflected on, when I think of Judas, I think of a person who was chosen to be one of the 12 apostles. Now, we know that there were many followers of Jesus. We know that there were 72 disciples, and we know that these were very, these were significant people. And there were also others that followed him around that weren't even part of those. But out of all of the people, Jesus chose 12 men. These 12 men were very close to him. Now remember, Jesus has this big vision that he wants to bring everybody back to his Father. He wants to change the direction of the world from the power of Satan to the power of God. And he looked to 12 key people as the ones who were going to be able, once he left, to be able to carry on this great job. And he turned to this man by the name of Judas, and he looked at him and he saw what was good. And he saw something filled with great promise. This was a man he chose to be an apostle. Just to stop and think about that as Jesus, why would he choose someone like that? Because he saw he was good. He saw that he was full of promise. And then in addition to this, we find that Jesus entrusted to this man, Judas, the responsibility for the money of the 12 apostles and for the disciples. He was the one that carried the purse. He was the one that carried the finances. And Judas was the one that brought the money to a poor person, a sick person, a widow that needed help. Judas was the one that did that. I sometimes laugh when I think about this. Because Judas was really very unlikely, despite the fact that he maybe had some knowledge of money. But remember that Jesus also chose one of his apostles by the name of Matthew. And who was Matthew? Well, Matthew was a main tax collector in a town called Capharnaum. He was a big money man, and rather than give the money purse to Matthew, he gave it to Judas. And he must have seen in Judas a very, very responsible and very, very knowledgeable person for taking care of the money of that. One of the things that's also important to remember is the reality of intimacy that Judas had with Jesus. Now, I'm going to jump towards the end of our experience of Judas, and we know that he sought in a way to be able to betray Jesus by getting money from the religious leaders in Jerusalem, and then he wanted to give a sign when they came to Jesus at a dark night in a garden of how they would be able to find out who Jesus was. And what was that sign? It was a kiss. Isn't that fascinating? Now, we can say that that was just kind of out of the blue and that was not anything there, but maybe there was really a beautiful bond of intimacy between the two, that there was a love and there was a care, and so that this kiss that Judas gave was not the first kiss that he had given, but was just a continuing sign of his deep love for Jesus and his desire to show respect for him. I find that interesting. We know that the kiss was a terrible thing to do because it betrayed Jesus, but it did betray something of an intimacy and a closeness. When I think of Judas, though, I think of that importance that Jesus saw in him, but I ask the big question, why did he betray him? Why would this beautiful bond that Jesus had reached out to, why would Judas want to mess it up? What was going on? I came up with certain thoughts. When we talk with scholars who know about the Bible, they say that Judas was one of only one out of all the 12 that was from Judah, which was the southern part of the Holy Land. Remember, Jesus was from the north. He was from the place called Galilee. And then in the south, you had Judah. And most of the 11, well, all of the 11 other apostles were from this northern part of the Holy Land. It seems that Judas, because we get this from his father's name, his name was Simon Iscariot, which is related to a name Kerioth, which was a town in Judah. So in reality, Judas was a little bit of an outsider. He wasn't part of the Galilean clique, if you will, of certain people. There's another thought of why he did this, and we're just trying to build a case for why Judas did this. As you know, the Jewish people suffered a great deal by foreign powers. First there were the Assyrians, and then the Greeks came in, and now in the time of Jesus, the Romans had come in, and they dominated the land. They were in control of the land. And there were terrorists in the group who wanted to overthrow this Roman presence. They were true terrorists, and they would do everything they could with swords, and they didn't have guns or bombs in those times, but swords and disruptions to try to stop the presence of the Romans. And it very well might be that Judas was so filled with the love of the Jewish country, so filled with that the thought of maybe Jesus with his power to walk on water, his power to be able to stand in front of 15,000 people and talk, that force, that maybe Jesus was the one who could be able to turn around their terrible wrong of the Romans occupying their land. And is it possible that maybe Jesus passed on Jesus with the hope of getting him to come into action, getting him to start to do what he knew Jesus should be doing, which was coming in and running out these Romans. Maybe by pushing him into this situation of the betrayal, maybe things would start in that way. Well, Another explanation that we find from the Bible as to why Judas turned and did this terrible thing was the very presence of Satan. We find again and again that the power of Satan entered into him, entered into his life, and he became a different person. Both in Luke and later on in Matthew, we find the situations of the devil had already put himself right into the heart of Judas to betray him. You know? Fascinating thoughts, aren't they? And I'm not trying in any way to raise up Judas, but I am trying to say each of us, sometimes with our distorted understandings, reach for the wrong thing. And sometimes they cause very evil things to happen in our life. Judas, the betrayer of Jesus, why did he do it? Oh, why? But now the challenge comes. What about you and what about me and from this life? What do we need to learn from this life to be better followers of Jesus? Please stay tuned. For your willingness to be able to help us here in our television ministry, I want to send you a gift for your gift. It's written by a priest, a friend of mine. His name is Father Marty Padovani. He's a member of my community. The title of the book is Healing Wounded Relationships. It speaks to the heart of what goes on in your family, in your marriage. So many times the struggle between a husband and a wife, parents and children, even the struggle between the close family and the distant family is something that needs to have an answer, needs help. And I want to tell you that this book by my friend, Father Padovani, is going to reach into your heart in a loving, caring way. The topics that are handled are some that you're going to say, oh dear, things like communication, listening. How do you deal with conflict? How do you have greater intimacy in your marriage, especially when perhaps you've been together for too many years to now really have intimacy, not just physical intimacy, but emotional intimacy and even spiritual intimacy. The book is powerful, and the book is going to enable you to find the peace and the bridge that you're looking for to be able to come to the fullness of what it means to have a life together. Remember, Father Marty Padovani, Healing Wounded Relationships. Make sure you get in touch with us through your check, through your donation, and ask, please, would you send me that important book that can bring healing to my marriage, to my family? Please do it right now. We're looking at Judas Iscariot, the betrayer of Jesus, the one who was deeply loved by Christ, who was chosen by Christ, and yet somehow had turned his life around and caused a great, great scandal, a great, great problem in our world today. Well, what does the life of Judas have to say to you and to me as we try to follow Jesus in our own life? Well, Judas was a betrayer, a traitor. A lot of times you and I struggle with our own commitments in life, whether it's marriage, whether it's to those that we love, whether it's even a bond of friendship that we might have. The whole fact of being a traitor challenges us to make sure that when we do say something, I as a priest, you as a married person, as a single person, as a friend, and whatever you are, in the church that you remain faithful. That's the challenge that I think Judas gives us in our own life. You know? One of the real struggles that Judas seemed to come up with was the situation of money. He was the one who had the purse, And he was the one who went to the leaders looking for those 30 pieces of silver in order to get something. And so money became a very important factor in his downfall. Well, it speaks to you and me. Here I and my television ministry trying to make ends meet, and sometimes I can be obsessed with, oh dear, where are we going to get the money for this, and how are we going to be able to continue? And sometimes the fear and the insecurity of money can affect me physically, but it also can affect the relationship that I have with other people. With my attitude, I can become very difficult to deal with if I'm obsessed with this money factor. One time I was talking with a counselor who was responsible for talking right here in the Southern California with couples who were planning to get divorced. And he would have to meet with them because there was a requirement as a counselor to meet with them. And after being with him for a couple of weeks, I asked him, I said, could you give me some insight into what's the main thing that causes divorce? And I thought maybe he'd say communication or this or that. And he said the biggest thing that he encountered was money. We do know that money can be very, very divisive because it's our source of security, it's our source of peace. I mentioned to you the fact that some scholars are trying to say that Judas was the only one of all the 12 apostles who was from Judah, from the southern part of that Holy Land that we know, and that there were others, that the other 11 were from the north. How do we treat the outsider who's part of our life? You and I both know that we have a terrible problem, not only with young people, but even with the older, with the situation of bullying, the words that are used, the influences that we use to try to really hurt another person. I'm wondering if that wasn't a factor, that he felt as a minority, that he really wasn't what he should be in the eyes of others, and that became part of the tension and the struggle. And maybe, and this is interesting, maybe that's why Jesus chose him, because he wanted to highlight the importance of people who are different from others can be together and can be part of that 12 apostle group that shines out as a sign of hope to the rest of the world. You know? I wonder about that, and think about that with regard to the bullying that maybe you say as you speak negative words about a person of another religion or an immigrant that comes from another country. You know? The Judas story is one that speaks to us of some real concrete challenges in our own life. The next thing that I think about is this whole concept of possibly Judas wanting to be part of a rebellion that was going to overthrow the Roman powers that were there. And it makes sense, doesn't it? And I can only imagine that if I were in the shoes of someone like that, if I were living in a world in which a foreign power was coming in and taking taxes and pushing me around and telling me what I could do and what I couldn't do, it could be very easy for me to want to be in rebellion, to try to get them out in order that I can have my freedom, that I can live the life the way that I want. You know? How do we deal with rebellion in our own life? That if Judas was that, maybe even hoping that Jesus was going to rise up and become that leader that was going to overthrow the Romans, what about me in rebellion? Many times rebellion is not a bad thing, and especially if we run into a reality of injustice in our world, in our work, in our school, in our church. If there's injustice, if people aren't being treated the way they should, that spirit of rebellion, that spirit of wanting to change things is something that God could use in order to being able to bring about a change in our world today. It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? We might criticize this expectation that Judas had that, oh, Jesus would be this thing that Jesus really wasn't planning to do. But it does speak to us of making sure that we are people who are willing to speak out when things are not going properly in our own life, when injustice is happening, and we speak out and we demand that things are happening in the right way. There's an interesting aspect about Judas, and that's the fact that after everything had developed in the situation of his being a betrayer, and suddenly he had gotten his money, he had gone and he had kissed Jesus, and the soldiers came and they took him away, all of a sudden, Judas faced the fact that things weren't going the way he thought that they would go, and suddenly he found that he had made a terrible mistake. And perhaps he was hoping that, as I said, maybe Jesus, pushed to this extreme, would have stood up and then become that force to drive out the Romans and to drive out all injustice. Suddenly it wasn't happening, and here Judas could look off and could see that Jesus had been beaten, and a crown of thorns had been put on his head, and people were shouting out that they wanted to crucify him. This man who had been chosen by Jesus to be one of the 12 elite, one of the special group of apostles, he looked over at this man that he loved, and he saw that it was ruined. And Scripture says that he repented. He came back to the leaders who had given him the money, and he said, I've done something wrong. He's not the man that you see. And he took the money and he threw it right down. He didn't want anything to do with that money anymore. And filled with depression, he went and he hung himself in a tree. Oh my. You and I can be very much concerned about those young people that we hear about, and so many teenagers are committing suicide. And oh gosh, the number of men and women who have served in our war situations, the number of their suicides is even greater than the numbers of those that were killed in action in Iraq and Afghanistan. The number of suicides is even greater. Judas in his suicide speaks to us of the reality of great, great depression, great hopelessness, and even the fear that those who have committed suicide are lost. I'm going to say something now, and I'm not able to speak in terms of this is the official statement, but I have a real hard time believing that Jesus would condemn Judas to hell. So many times when I hear of a suicide, the suicide is something similar to what a person might experience with cancer. It's a sickness that enters into their bodies, into their minds, and into their souls. And I've got to believe in a very strong way that Jesus is reaching out and really loving and forgiving. And so when we talk about those people that do commit suicide, may we have some of that compassion and willingness of Jesus to forgive them, and to understand that like a cancer, that you wouldn't condemn someone in cancer for things that they've done. So somehow this distortion of their minds and the confusion is something of a sickness that God would understand. May we be very short to condemn and very quick to be filled with the forgiveness and the love of Jesus, even with a person like Judas. I would like to invite you to participate in this program, not only with your prayers, but also with your donations. And as you reach out and give support, I would like to reach out and give you a very special gift. It's a book by a friend of mine, Father Marty Padovani, a Divine Word missionary. The title of the book is Healing Wounded Relationships. This book gets to the heart of what's breaking up families today. The struggle with communication, the struggle with commitment, the struggle with intimacy in our life. I want you to have this and not only be blessed by what you see on the television program, But you can take this home and you can take this to bed and you can allow yourself to reach the fullness of the meaning of what real love is about by allowing relationships to be healed. May we be understanding and full of forgiveness, which I deeply believe would be the attitude that Jesus would take. But we also have to pray in a very special way for those military people that are struggling with a decision about suicide, with young people, and with anyone who's overcome with despair and overcome with depression that are looking for healing. Lord, please come into their lives. Be their light. Be their hope. Be their source of forgiveness. Allow them to understand how deeply you love them and are willing to forgive them. Let them know that you've empowered them with gifts. You've put in them talents and visions and hopes that in your eyes are the key to bringing about a radical and beautiful change in the world. Touch these people's hearts, Lord. And touch all of these wonderful people that have written into us, those that are reaching out and asking for prayer. Jesse in Alabama is hoping for a home. Annie is praying for her grandmother here in California. Cheryl in Texas, she wants to pray for her fiance and her brother-in-law. You know. And over here in Kentucky, good old Kentucky, I used to live in Louisville, we have a thing that Terry is asking for real healing in her life. Lord, please, all these people, all these ones that you love so very, very deeply, flood them with the awareness that you are in their life, that you are living in them. And let that love become the foundation and the hope and the peace and the joy that they're looking for. Come into us, Lord, and may the example of Judas, which was a person that you love so deeply and that you empowered so much, help his example to challenge us to be people who are faithful, willing to stand up and fight for justice, and to make your love so real. Now may Jesus' love for you always make you smile.